Right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my privilege as Chief Executive of Coram to welcome you all here today for what is re-emerging as an annual tradition to celebrate our common cause with the Thomas Coram Research Unit of University College London. But today we are also celebrating a broader partnership development between Coram and UCL, which will immediately follow the event today. First thing to say is that there is no fire alarm planned. And so, surprisingly enough, you'll have to follow these very obvious signs should the fire alarm go off. The other thing to say is that we are hoping that you will join the conversation online and post on Blue Sky, and hashtags will be on screen throughout. And the lecture will be recorded and shared publicly, but the recording will be stopped for response, discussion, and Q&A. You will each find a flyer on your chair, so please do share your insights and keep this in mind throughout the event. And there may be some pens available, although I'm not promising that. So having done that, let us think. Why are we here? And why are we here to discuss the topic of tonight's lecture? So we are sitting in the birthplace of children's social care, and a continuous mission since Thomas Coram first thought and developed his, what he called, Darling Project, to support children abandoned on the streets of London in the 18th century. That mission continues now on a broader platform across Coram as a centre for children's rights and welfare, taking insight from research into policy and practice. The first record in our archive of inward migration of children to the then Foundling Hospital is 1752. And today, we are and continue to be a tireless champion for the rights and welfare of migrant children through our dedicated policy and practice team. So that's our relationship to the area, and we are delighted, therefore, to have such distinguished speakers and our young people from the Young Citizens today to join us to look at the issues and outcomes for children in the care system with these diverse backgrounds. I'm going to therefore now hand over to Professor Mette Louise Berg, who is the co-director of the Thomas Coram Research Unit, to say her first introductory remarks and lead us into the meat of the event. Just to remind you, do stay, because afterwards there's food and drinks.
Great. Thank you, Carol, and I'm also really pleased to welcome you all to this annual lecture. Now, the relationship that the Thomas Coram Research Unit has with Coram began over 50 years ago in 1973, when TCRU, as part of the Institute for Education, was founded as a research unit, sharing premises with Coram here, and it has very happily been revitalised in recent years through this joint annual lecture. Now, TCRU started out as a centre focusing on children and families. Today we have a broader remit organised in 3 streams of research. I won't go into detail, but just very briefly, we have one stream of research on children's well-being, services and practices, which includes early childhood education and care, education and other services for looked after children and care experienced young people, health services for families, young people's identities and transitions, and social pedagogy. We've also developed work on gender, labour and diverse families, including parental leave, motherhood and fatherhood, reproduction, gender equality and fluidity, family diversity, poverty and food poverty, and work, family care, reconciliation. And then Our final or third stream of work, which is also very relevant for today's lecture, is about migration, mobility and diversity, and includes work on migrant experiences, access to services, citizenship and belonging, transnational practices, place-based inequalities, asylum, and the intersections of race, gender and migration for young people. We use a wide range of research methods, and we have a particular tradition in cross-national and multi-method research design and participatory research methods. Now, throughout the life of TCRU, we have been committed to research and teaching for social justice for the communities we work with. We have a deep commitment to engaging with policy and practice, knowledge exchange and outreach, and we look forward to continuing this work with Coram. Today's lecture is especially timely, with its focus on supporting the lives and aspirations of children and young people migrating to the UK alone, and it speaks to the work of both TCRU and Coram. Our speaker, Elaine Chase, is a UCL colleague with a long-standing connection to and with TCRU. Just to go into, it's a multi-part program, tonight's program. So after Elaine's lecture, we will have responses from two young people with lived experience, Amina Meshnuni and Abdullahi Yusuf, who are graduates of Coram's amazing Young Citizens program, and we'll then have a panel discussion and then the signing of the MOU, as Carol said. So let me move to introduce our distinguished speaker. Elaine Chase is Professor of Education and Wellbeing at the Center for Education and International Development at IOE, UCL's Faculty of Education and Society. Her research and writing focus on the well-being of communities facing disadvantage and marginalization. She has extensive experience of conducting research with unaccompanied children and young people seeking asylum in the UK. Her current research focuses on the well-being outcomes of children, young people and families subject to immigration control, and on educational well-being in contexts of mass displacement. Her recent publications include the co-authored book, Becoming Adult on the Move, Migration Journeys, Encounters and Life Transitions, and the co-edited Crisis for Whom? Critical Global Perspectives on Childhood Care and Migration, both published in 2023. Thank you so much, Elaine, for accepting our invitation, and we're all really looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Meta and Carol, and it's a real honour to be here and to be offering the annual lecture today. I began my research career a few years ago, let's say, at the Thomas Coram Research Unit, and so it's great to be back, and also wonderful to share the space with Coram and with Amina and Abdullahi and others here today. In his book, The Post-Colonial Age of Migration, Ranabir Samadar, director of the Calcutta Research Group, critiques a seminal text in migration studies, read by just about every migration scholar, by Stephen Castles and colleagues, The Age of Migration, which is now in its 6th edition. And his main critique of the work is that while it has captured the scale and patterns of global movement over many years, it has consistently failed to center the human experience of migration. It largely ignores people's collective histories of migration, particularly their colonial histories. It ignores the spatiality, where people come from, go back to, pass through, and it ignores people's autonomy and agency. The question, he suggests then, is not who is the refugee, but what is the refugee condition? In conversation with Amina and Abdullahi about what they felt was most important to put across in today's event, they said to communicate not how the asylum system works, but how it feels to be within it. So centering this human experience against a backdrop of often vilifying, stigmatizing, global and national political rhetoric sits then at the heart of how best to support children and young people arriving at the borders of the UK. And I'm not going to focus too much on numbers in line with Ranabir's view, but each year several thousand children arrive without an accompanying adults and are classified as unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, a term I'll return to shortly. The actual number fluctuates, reflecting the shifting global dynamics. Just over 4,000 claims were made for asylum from unaccompanied minors in 2024. The majority of them were determined to be between the ages of 16 and 17, 76%. And in March 2024, there were around 7,380 children categorised as unaccompanied asylum-seeking children under 18 years in council care across England. There is, as we've repeatedly argued, an unknown number of children who arrive and never register a claim for asylum, and for about whom we know very little. A particular focus of my research with colleagues over the years has been what happens to young people once they reach the bureaucratic age of so-called adulthood at 17 and a half years without any secure legal status in the UK. And I want to emphasise that when young people do get status and are given adequate support and resources, they can go on to achieve incredible things. And we've seen that from all the young people that we've worked with over the years. There are many examples of successful lives, careers, enormous contributions to communities, to societies, and dare I say it, to our economy. In many cases, however, with the young people we've worked with, it's taken years of struggling through the system to enable them to achieve this. And as our research and the work of others has consistently documented, so many others are never given the opportunity to build the lives they aspire to. I come at this work through a sociological lens with a particular interest in health and well-being and a deep concern for social justice. The richness of the work, though, comes through combining disciplinary lenses, collaboration with an amazing group of third sector organisations, and of course from the creativity, insights and knowledge of the multiple young people I've had the pleasure to work with. They've led and participated in research, been at the forefront of policy and advocacy initiatives, as we'll see later this evening, and are central to providing support to other children and young people within the system. I'm going to give a quick overview of the research that we've covered before landing on some what I see as entrenched problems which limit the provision of care and support to young people in the UK, and end hopefully on a more positive note by giving some examples of what I consider to be comprehensive, amazing care and support. So the first study that I was involved with Abigail Knight, hi Abigail, and Jean Statham was part of the Department of Health portfolio here at the Thomas Coram Research Unit. And the main argument here was to push back against the very individualised, medicalised perspectives on mental health of young people that tended to dominate the field, and instead allow space for children and young people to articulate their own perspectives on the factors that were shaping their subjective well-being. I pursued this body of work through my PhD with a focus on understanding health and well-being through the concept of ontological security. That means the ability to sustain a biographical narrative, a sense of who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going in the world. The idea that well-being is intrinsically linked to a sense of imagined and possible futures, hopes and aspirations, a concept that I'll return to. Recognising through previous work the particular challenges facing young people as they made that transition at 18, the Becoming Adult project explored these ideas further, working with an amazing group of peer researchers, fantastic range of NGO and charity organisations, and with colleagues such as Jennifer Alsop, Nando Sugona, Francesca Maloney, Rachel Humphreys, and Dawn Chatty, and a whole range of other experts on countries of origin. The multi-method study explored conceptualizations, meanings, and associations that young people gave to ideas about becoming adult, about migration, and about well-being, and the factors that they perceived to be shaping their well-being outcomes. More recently, during COVID-19, we were approached by Shpresa, an Albanian community organisation, who were keen to capture the real-time pressures on young people in the asylum system as a result of the pandemic. So with Helen Stolford and Will Shankly at Liverpool Centre for Law and Justice, and Ingi Eisman and Jana Krepner at Southampton, we co-designed a research project with an amazing team of young researchers from Spressa, and Amina today is amongst those who were part of that team. And this was subsequently, after we designed it, it was subsequently funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. The study revealed how the many challenges faced by young people seeking asylum were exacerbated through the imposed and to a large extent manipulated delays of the pandemic and the detrimental impacts that this was having on their well-being. This image by one of the peer researchers, I think, captures beautifully some of the complexities of those experiences. So the common principles of this work are to center young people's experiences and bring out the richness and complexities of their lives, to co-create research agendas, research designs and practices with young people and the organizations supporting them, to integrate the arts and humanities with social sciences and therefore be able to reach a much wider range of audiences with the ideas that we're generating, and build communities of research practice with core organizations and young people. There are other notable examples, including the Children Caring on the Move project, led by Rachel Rosen and Sarah Crafter. And together this work, I think, constitutes what we might term as an epistemological turn in how we generate and share knowledge with and about the experience of being within the asylum system, focusing on the plurality of knowledges, feelings, emotions, values, adding texture and nuance to the multiple realities of those experiences. And that's not to suggest in any way that we've done that perfectly. Such research is complex and difficult, but we worked hard with young people to critique the processes and to think about what we've learned along the way, and to settle on how best to generate knowledge together, grounded in the ethical values of all those participating, protecting young people from harm, and most importantly, making the process as enriching as possible for young people. So, through that, we've written a lot of policy briefs, of papers, of books, of articles. We've also co-created a lot of songs, poems, photography, theatre, comedy sketches, films, animations like the Dear Habib animation that's been widely seen and viewed and engaged with. We've engaged widely with policy circles, academics, policy audiences, and we've hopefully added in some small ways to the advocacy work within the space. And yet, despite some small drip changes, on the whole, arguably, things are getting worse for many young people in the asylum system. There's a sense of feeling straitjacketed by a rigid system which limits the possibilities for change and improvement, and while we're tinkering around the edges, we're struggling to realize any fundamental changes. And I want to highlight what I see as some of the key systematic obstacles to supporting young people effectively. The first one, of course, has to be the proliferation of borders. In the words of Keir Starmer last week, the primary political imperative of the government's new white paper is taking back control of our borders. Borders are presented then as benign necessities for the public good. In the face of the invoked crisis of immigration, of austerity, of economics, borders are constructed as the panacea for addressing entrenched inequalities in society. Little mention then of borders as sites of extreme violence, nor of the armory of weapons deployed for border securitization. Frontier border police, camps, detention centers, prisons, the criminalization of the search for protections, Home Office patrol vans, technologies of surveillance, forced removals, and deportation notices. The border is central not only to the framing, design, and implementation of legislation and policies related to immigration and asylum, but to the accompanying vitriolic, dehumanizing, and racist rhetoric reflected in policy, media, and public debates. Yet the border transcends national boundaries, and as many people here will be aware, comes into the daily practices affecting young people's access to legal protections and due process, to social care provisions, to housing, to education, to health. The border fundamentally shapes the opportunities and constraints on young people and the possibilities for providing support. Nero Yuval Davis has repeatedly highlighted the insidious proliferation of everyday bordering practices. This involves the devolution of immigration controls to public services, rendering frontline workers, like all of us, central actors in daily practices of migration governance. These processes, what Arida and Tazioli referred to as rebordering, involve the repurposing of existing practices to produce new bordering techniques. Young people then don't just contend with the immigration official at the border, but are subsequently subjected to a proliferation of borders as they navigate the asylum and social care frameworks. Considering how best to support young people then means critically engaging with the apparatuses of bordering and how they permeate all aspects of the experience of arriving and making a life in the UK. The second issue I want to land on is this idea of labelling and what Nando Sagona and Rachel Humphreys have referred to as bureaucratic capture. Young people arriving in the border are sorted between the bona fide child deserving protection or the adult masquerading as a child to sham the system. For those who are accepted as children below the age of 18, the unaccompanied asylum-seeking child, or more commonly the short-term UASC, becomes the bureaucratic label they carry through the system. For those whose claims as children are dismissed at the border, they are marched on through the adult system and the associated processes of illegal entry. The label of the unaccompanied asylum-seeking child, I argue, is problematic on a number of levels. The unaccompanied child conjures a homogenized body of abandoned, isolated, disconnected children and young people floating independently in the world. Our and other research has repeatedly shown the complex interconnectedness between young people who move and families, friends, and loved ones and communities who remain in countries of origin or transit through or in transit or who remain immobile. The research has shown the care practices and reciprocity that young people show for each other and the communities they build among each other as they move and often and after they become and after they move. And I think the Children Caring on the Move project, again, has been fundamental in demonstrating these connections. Becoming adult on the move, while young people are intricately tied to what Peggy Levitt and Glick Schiller refer to as transnational social fields, they are part of an interlocking set of networks of social relationships through which ideas, practices, and resources are, albeit unequally, exchanged, organized, and transformed. And in Becoming Adult on the Move, we brought to light the histories, politics, cultural repertoires, and practices surrounding migration, adulthood, and well-being emerging from young people's countries of origin, from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Albania, and Vietnam, and how these ideas transcended national boundaries into the global space. So young people may be excluded, isolated, alienated by the border, but they are far from being unaccompanied. They build and hold peer and friendship networks in the physical space. They sustain relationships with loved ones in distant transnational spaces. They maintain social and support networks through digital space and carry with them their rich cultural heritage, histories, and values. Asylum-seeking, the other part of the label, carries an untold baggage for young people. Children are driven to migrate for complex intersecting factors that make life unsustainable in the country that they're coming from, including war, conflict, violence, climate injustices, food insecurities, extreme poverty, and of course, direct forms of persecution. To secure refugee status, they need to meet the criteria of the Refugee Convention of 51 and its Universalizing Protocol of 1967, demonstrating a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, or membership of a particular social group. It's worth remembering that the Refugee Convention was never designed with children in mind, and it's taken many struggles to even begin to have child-specific forms of persecution recognized before the law. Jacqueline Barber's work has been particularly influential in this. So escaping generalized violence is insufficient grounds for asylum, as is living in dire, inhumane conditions of a refugee camp for many years, or fleeing family-based violence, such as a blood feud. When they arrive at the border, young people are captured by the asylum-seeking label and then subsequently have to make sense of and navigate it. So unravels a complex process of assessment, interviewing, interrogation, reinterrogation, often rejection, appeals, judicial reviews, etc. Processes that take at best months Through our work, we've repeatedly come across young people waiting up to 10 years and beyond of uncertainty before they can secure a right to remain in the UK, and many others who never managed to do that. Which brings us to the third point, which is the inadequacies of protection frameworks for young people and the lack of durable solutions. Given that the majority of young people are determined as 16 or 17 years of age at the border, the window in which they remain children is very short. This highlights the limitations of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. But at a national level, in order to access the social care system as a looked-after child and to be able to access relevant leave-in care provisions, resolving asylum applications becomes a race against time. Those who turn 18 while their asylum claims are still pending may no longer be legally recognised as children with access to international protections and may be unable to remain in the UK. They may also become ineligible for social care support and or be detained pending removal to their country of origin. And of course, such exclusions can be contested, but navigating and the due process of that requires expertise of highly specialised legal practitioners. There are some fantastic examples. Coram Legal Centre for one, the Migration Children's Legal Unit at Islington Law Centre for another, and numerous law firms that pick up pro bono work in the cause of social justice. These are the goodies at the border who work tirelessly to help young people access their rights through the courts, through appeals, through judicial reviews. This work makes the difference for so many young people between access to and exclusion from refugee status and for other forms of protection and different forms of social care, education, health, and health resources and services. Yet, as we have argued, getting high quality legal technical support and guidance is largely serendipitous. It's contingent on mediators of rights, the outstanding social worker, foster carer, teacher, educator, civil society organisation, people who make young people aware of their rights and facilitate access to them. This is the fundamental difference between normative rights, that is, what rights young people should have, and the processes of practical justice, or how such rights come into practice. These ideas around the sociologies of rights I've drawn from the work from Lydia Morris and Kostas Douzinas primarily. Research over the years has illustrated the unequal access to justice for young people and the ensuing destitution, exclusion, curtailments to opportunity and forced removals. The term durable solutions, according to the UN High Commission for Refugees, can mean three key possibilities: integration into the country of asylum, resettlement in a third country where the former isn't possible, or voluntary repatriation to countries of origin. We've repeatedly shown through our work the disconnect between these bureaucratic ideas of durable solutions and how young people pursue their own solutions, even if not with the best outcomes. And they decide what's in their best interests. They form their own systems of support. They resist bureaucratic capture by, for example, going missing, even if this has detrimental consequences. And this image was taken by a young man called Abdul, obviously not his real name. He arrived as an unaccompanied child into the UK and from Afghanistan, and at 18 was deported back to Afghanistan. When life was unsustainable there, he migrated again, fearing to come back to the UK, tried to make his way to Australia. Australia outsources all of its immigration controls. And so he ended up for at least 2 years during the course of our research in a detention centre camp in Indonesia. And he sent us this photo because he wanted to show us of the group that he'd been part of that were protesting because they were forgotten and wanted some resolution to their situation. He was told that he could wait up to 7 years for a decision from the UNHCR to be allocated a country for refugee status. So I think the image is so illustrating of the epitome of exclusion and bordering. A fourth issue that I want to centre on is the very reductionist medicalised gaze that tends to be imposed on young people's health and well-being. There have been numerous studies employing different measures to demonstrate relatively poor mental health outcomes, measure trauma experienced, and to establish the relative likelihood of depression, anxiety, somatic conditions, or suicidal ideation of young people. This work is important to some extent, and even more importantly, good clinical assessment is key in enabling people to access more clinical services and the mental health services that they need, and may be vital in supporting claims to asylum. At the same time, this clinical gaze has tended to essentialize the figure of the vulnerable and traumatized child. Vulnerability is used as a tool in the bordering weaponry to sort the vulnerable from the invulnerable, to generate forms of inclusion and exclusion. Last week, I was writing a reference letter in support of an extension of leave to remain in the UK for a young person who had arrived as an unaccompanied child. 8 years on, and even though 2 years into a completion of a degree course funded by a Sanctuary Scholarship, they still face the spectre of removal by the Home Office. Such letters then become a balancing act between doing justice to the talent, tenacity, and successes of young people, yet still illuminating the risks and vulnerabilities should they be returned. Making them appear too agentic renders them removable on the grounds of inadequate vulnerability. They've done so well, they can survive anywhere. The term precarity then, what Judith Butler defines as politically induced vulnerability, is a truer representation of what is really happening. Vulnerability perhaps suggests embodied intrinsic frailties within the child, which renders them at risk of harm. Precarity recognizes that such harms are largely induced by bordering processes and by the manipulation of policies and frameworks which, according to international law, are intended to offer protection and refuge. Trauma and vulnerability are then to varying extents byproducts of the global bordering apparatuses young people have encountered before they arrive and what they encounter in their search for security once they get here. The solution to this, then, is a tendency to medicate rather than engage with some of the more fundamental problems of the system. Through the Becoming Adult project, young people seeking asylum highlighted their own understandings of well-being. These were very much aligned with that concept of ontological security discussed earlier. They were looking for safety and security, legal integrity and recognition, a solid sense of identity and belonging, the possibility to construct a viable future, a strong sense of emotional well-being, and being able to build and sustain friendships, connections, and relationships with people here and others transnationally. So the everyday border, then, is the contested space where these aspirations are negotiated. The traumatized, vulnerable child is a construction and instrument of the border. The actual child or young person at the border is so much more than this. They may have been through a lot, and here I want to emphasize, I'm by no means dismissing trauma and the impact that it has on young people. And they have lost a lot, but they embody hope, aspirations, creativity, love, compassion, care, and joy. They have their own histories of the contributions they have made from the places they have come from, and ideas of all the things they want to do and contributions they want to make moving forward. And so the fifth issue and final issue I want to land on then is this huge chasm between the search for safety and security and the systemic violence of the system. And this is an image that was produced by young people as part of a photography project. Although somewhat dated, Paul Galtong's definition of violence in this context stands the test of time, particularly since it links so well, I think, to this idea of ontological security. Violence, he says, is present when human beings are being influenced so that their actual somatic or bodily and mental realizations are below their potential realizations. The gap, then, between young people's aspirations and what the system makes possible epitomizes violence. It's systemic violence, it's legally imposed violence, it's violence by design. And the effects of such limitations on young people over time constitute what Rob Nixon refers to as slow violence, harms that are incremental and attritional. They have a corrosive effect on young people's sense of hope, their identities, their possible futures and aspirations. And again, I think that idea is beautifully illustrated here by this image produced by Ergest. And just to give a couple of concrete examples about how that violence plays out. Age assessments were previously conducted when there was a reasonable doubt about a young person's age, with the emphasis on giving young people the benefit of the doubt. Now we see a proliferation of routine age assessments conducted by a range of different actors. These are acts of violence. They're traumatizing. There are reports of them lasting several days. They use aggressive questioning and often with no appropriate adult. The National Age Assessment Board was established in 2022 as part of the Nationality and Borders Act to the tune of £1.7 million a year. It's been heavily criticised as a waste of money, diverting scarce NHS resources for unnecessary and unscientific and degrading dental checks and MRI scans. It's been criticised for violating the rights in relation to informed consent, and young people are told that if they refuse the scans and the checks, they are threatened with being automatically assessed as adults. The Refugee Migrant Children's Consortium report, published in March this year, is a damning account of the misuse of age assessments. Between January and June 2024, 262 children on review had been misclassified as adults within just 6 months. And between January 2022 and 2023, 1,300 children were wrongly assessed as adults by the Home Office and sent to adult accommodation or detention before being referred, often months later, to local authority children's services. Home Office decision-making on age is increasingly made at the border, where children can be sent to adult accommodation or detention without further assessment. The related harms include potential abuse and exploitation, running away and destitution, severe mental health problems, and a number of attempts at suicide. There have been evidence as well of the criminalisation of age-disputed young people arriving in the UK who've been prosecuted for crimes related to illegal entry and smuggling. And identifying when children have been wrongly age assessed is left to the work of charities who happen to be working out of accommodation centres and in hotels. It's serendipitous. There's no due process to help identify wrongly assessed children. In hotel accommodation, young people live on £8 a week, poor quality food, no access to clothes or transport to access alternative services of support or community organisations. While there continue to be debates on how best to reform age assessment processes, and these debates have now been running for many, many years, there's an even more compelling argument, as made by Rachel Rosen, for their abolishment on the grounds that they are part of the racialised weaponry to support an intrinsically violent border regime. The Lives on Hold, Our Stories Told project with Sprecher documented how delays in the asylum process were purposefully used to border access to support and highlighted the risks for young people aging out of protections while waiting the resolution of asylum claims. This often had severe impacts on their mental health and left them exposed to multiple forms of exploitation. During the study, over 18 months, 56 participants who had arrived under the age of 18 years. Out of the 56 participants, 23 turned 18 before an initial decision was made. Only children under 18 can access legal aid to have a legal representative present at their substantive interview, and we know that having that legal representative there fundamentally shapes the outcome of that interview. Further research by Nando Sigona, Rachel Humphreys, Rachel Rosen and Sarah Crafter have revealed the consequences of privatisation of asylum provisions and housing, the resulting out-of-county placements where there's little access to support from or accountability required of the placing authority, how young people are rendered raw material for profit from private companies, and how it becomes even more difficult for young people to regularise their status at 18 when they are highly likely to have social care and education provision withdrawn. I think the most damning research that's coming out at the moment is work by groundbreaking research by Benny Hunter that indicates that there have been at least 50 deaths of unaccompanied young people seeking asylum in local authority care over the past 10 years. Painstaking work through freedom of information requests. While research is ongoing, it suggests that only in 3 cases were inquiries made into the causes of death and what could be learned, and those findings published. Resistance within this space then is crucial. The system works in ways to create chaos and confusion. There's very little appropriate data gathered on outcomes for young people. Research is often based on time-consuming, intensive freedom of information requests, usually done by the third sector. Under-resourced frontline workers are left uncertain about how to protect the best interests of young people, or are coerced into falling in line with whatever senior management establishes as protocol. Sustaining a critical voice in this space is difficult but vital. Back in the early 2000s, Beth Humphreys highlighted the tensions between the values of human rights and anti-oppression embedded within the social work code of practice and the increasing role frontline workers were expected to play as gatekeepers to services for people subject to immigration controls. Similarly, the British Association of Social Work have consistently been the critical voice in social work practice within the contested space of social care and asylum. Organisations like Coram have been central to guiding practitioners in this regard. For example, recognising the likely negative impacts on children and young people of the Illegal Migration Act 2023 and yet to come into effect. They have produced guidance and support for local authorities, including senior leadership, on what they can do to challenge, prepare for and mitigate the impact of the Act. And so it's the third sector that takes on the lion's share of mitigating the impacts of the violent system. And here I just want to focus on two organisations that I worked with very closely and I hold very dear to my heart. The first of them is Spressa, and the Spressa programme, Spressa means hope. And I want to take a moment to honour the memory of Lulieta Nuji here, the former CEO of Spressa, who died recently. Many of you may be aware of her incredible work and how she worked tirelessly to support young people arriving on their own. Embedded within the Albanian community, Spressa provides comprehensive support to young people from traditional food, youth activities and spaces, support with access to legal advice and assistance in accessing a wide range of services. But more importantly, they've invested time in building cadres of young people who've come through the asylum system or in many cases are still within the system and are at the forefront of advocacy work as asylum ambassadors, research champions, leadership initiatives, social justice projects, or heading up campaigns such as Educate, Not Hate. They're critical thinkers, they're creatives, they're an absolute joy to work with, and they show such commitment to this area of work. And the second organisation I want to focus on is DARO. Embedded within the Eritrean community, it supports young people from the Horn of Africa. DARO was set up in response to the deaths by suicides of young people arriving from Eritrea. And it offers integrated holistic care and support for young people. It works from very much an open-door youth work model, attracting more than 50 young people each week into its service where they have lots of fun. But it's layered by very intensive casework, helping young people through a range of really complex issues, including proper representation at age assessments, legal hearings, mental health support, housing reviews, challenging lack of access to social care. They provide wraparound care for young people who've been victims of racist attacks in London. One young person who lost their sight through an acid attack, another who was stabbed several times. They offer a mentoring program, ESOL and maths learning programs. They access to laptops and phones through organisations like ScreenShare with mentoring support to get online. They work tirelessly on family reunions, reuniting siblings that have been separated in their journeys, and painstaking work that can last many, many years. Driving this work is a commitment to responding to the human experiences of young people arriving and settling in the UK in all their diversity and in all their complexity. So to conclude, providing support to young people arriving and making their lives in the UK is not for the faint-hearted. Spaces of support are not neutral. They are contested, bordered spaces, critical sites of advocacy and practical justice. This work requires pushing back against the daily acts of violence imposed by the system. The third sector is championing these spaces, resisting and mitigating the direct effects of injustices, offering comprehensive holistic support, and advocating for systemic change. To this mix, we can offer years of research that constantly illustrates the enormous gap between young people's lives, experience, and aspirations, and the unworkable violent policies they encounter. Reimagining policies and practices which centre young people's best interests and rights and experiences would have untold benefits then, not just for young people themselves, but for society as a whole. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's now my great pleasure to invite